Hi, everyone. I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Naras Lapsys. He's the Chief Clinical Officer and Senior Dietitian at Chi Longevity. Welcome to the show, Naras.
Hi, thank you very much for listening today.
Glad to have you here. So let's start. Could you give us a little bit of a background of how you got into the longevity space?
Yeah, so if I sort of look back over time, pretty much everything I've always done, whether it was at university or the things that I was doing outside of university, had to do with helping people improve their health one way or another. I did a lot of study. I did a bachelor degree, a master's, a PhD, sort of basically all in different avenues of health. Uh, I also put myself through university teaching Muay Thai kickboxing and being a personal trainer. So, I sort of think I've had, just a solid grounding in that front. I worked as a research scientist for nearly 10 years in chronic health conditions. I worked as a private practice consultant dietitian now for nearly 25 years. And being in private practice, you very quickly move past just looking at food. And I was helping people be accountable for their eating patterns, sleeping patterns, exercise, uh, talking to some of the medical professionals that perhaps would refer their clients through to me. So I was getting a good understanding of the supplements that they might be taking in their medications. And all of this was happening years before longevity even became a thing.
Mhm.
But just listening to the things that I've just told you, these are all the things that we now hear and talk about when it comes to longevity medicine. So I've just been doing it for an awfully long time. And then about 10 years ago, the idea of longevity medicine started to rear its head, very, very small ways in Sydney, Australia, which is where I was working. And I met a couple of medical doctors that were in that sort of longevity space. I saw the qualifications that they had. There were no degree courses, but there were some board certifications in America and Australia. So I did those. And then my practice and everything that I did just accommodated some of the new ideas that were coming from the studies and what I was learning from all of these courses that I had done. So I think I've been there for a long, long time. And then what's happened is that longevity has sort of finally reached mainstream, but I was always there.
Hmm. Quite a diverse career that you've had there. Obviously, you have a rich experience in a lot of aspects of longevity. It's a fantastic background. So, can we talk a little bit about your longevity routine? Obviously, based on your experience, how do you approach exercise, diet, sleep, and supplements, for instance?
Yeah, so you know, my mind is always changing with respect to how I think about this. But lately, I really think a good way to frame it is a lot of the interventions that we now think about when it comes to longevity actually are mild stressors. So, this concept of hormesis, the idea that there is certain types of the right kind of stress in the right kind of dose that builds resilience. I think it's a really nice way to think about longevity and how it might underpin a whole lot of things that we do. Because we know that caloric restriction, for example, or high intensity exercise, uh, the other types of stresses that you might put yourself under by, for example, the foods that you eat and plant foods that contain phytonutrients, all of these things end up ultimately being stressors that can have an impact on longevity pathways. And whether those pathways are DNA repair, mitochondrial health, um, antioxidant impacts, all of these sort of foundations of what we know as the hallmarks of aging, all come from these hormetic stresses. So if I look at how I choose to live, uh, I cover a lot of those. I have eating patterns that are predominantly plant-based, which means that I'm getting access to a huge variety of plant foods, which ultimately have an impact on my microbiome. And again, many plant foods, huge amount of variety, then I'm going to get lots of phytonutrient-rich compounds that are going to have impacts on all of those different pathways. I'm no longer young, and so for me, exercise is just becoming even more important. So I need to exercise basically every day. And again, I've got to think about my strength, the amount of muscle that I actually carry, what my cardiorespiratory fitness is, what's my VO2 max, what am I doing for power. As we get older, we lose proprioception and balance and things like that. So I need to work on all of these fronts. So essentially, you need to be doing some kind of training almost every day, building in appropriate amounts of time for recovery. And then there is, for me at least, I put a very, very large focus on trying to keep sleep quality at a bearable level. I've got children and a very busy job, so trying to fix all these things in together is difficult. But I've placed a premium on that, and so how I choose to get through an evening, for example, might be a lot less Netflix and TV than I used to do in years gone by, because I put a premium on that extra 30 minutes of sleep that I might need to have. So that sort of ends up being my framework, in general terms.
That's great. I mean, that's a solid foundation for your diet, exercise, and sleep. And how do you do any supplements? Do you take any supplements on top of that?
So with supplementation, uh, I look at it from a few different places. The first would be, do I have any nutritional deficiencies that
Mm-hmm.
I'm not being satisfied by my eating patterns, or do I have a genetic disposition to perhaps not being able to metabolize certain compounds over others well? And so anything that could relate back to a potential nutritional deficiency, I look to see through my blood markers or through my eating patterns whether I have that deficiency or not, right? And so from a personal perspective, I live in Asia. I spend a lot of time, away from the sun, and so my vitamin D levels are lower than I would want them to be. I can't seem to bring those numbers up through diet, so I have to supplement with vitamin D. But
Mm-hmm.
that's probably more of a function of the fact that I can't get outside to the extent that I would like, right? So I have to take vitamin D. Uh, Again, I do take omega-3s because my eating patterns are predominantly plant-based, so I don't get, and it's quite difficult to get the amount of omega-3s that I need through plant. But I can also measure that one, because you can measure your omega-3 index.
Mm-hmm.
And so I take on the idea of testing, intervening, retesting whenever I can. We have a whole spectrum of, let's say, inverted comma, longevity supplements that are, more unregulated, and that you might not necessarily be able to blood test for them. So how I look with those, and it's all of the things like quercetin or NMN or um, fisetin, these sorts of ones. How I
Mm-hmm.
tend to view those is by looking at the evidence. And so, where does the evidence lie for any of these? Are any of these appropriate for me in my current life stage, or are there other ways that I can go about doing it? And to be honest, I don't think very many of them have hit the bar yet that would be applicable for me under my circumstance at my age. And then there is the different sorts of medications. So for somebody like myself, are there medications that I already need for various health conditions? And if so, which one might have cross benefits over and above the benefit that I would need it for, right? So again, I have to take medication for heart. Which one might be most appropriate, and are there some that may be having a cross purpose? So that's sort of how I view supplements and medication. I have a framework for it.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like more as needed basis versus shooting spaghetti at the wall and taking as many as you can, and then hope some of them are working, right? Like some
Well,
people take.
how do we know whether you have, if you're taking two or three or four, does that mean that if you take one, then the next one has an additive effect?
Right.
So then is it synergistic? Or how do we not know that one is cancelling out another, or you're ending up just with this soup of things? I remember listening to a podcast recently where they were talking about, if you treated your body as a car and you're tinkering with lots of different things within the car, how do you know that it's going to be running better or worse? And the likelihood is that you'll end up making the car run worse because you're tinkering on so many different things. My philosophy on the supplementation is, yes, you might not be able to pick a deficiency for some of these, and your intention is to optimize, but how do you choose your endpoint for optimization? And if you're doing lots of things at the same time, how do you have any idea which one's working and which one's not?
Mm. No, I like that approach, and I like that analogy, the car analogy too. So I'd like to transition to the fifth, what I call the fifth pillar of longevity, and get your, I guess, input on what you do in terms of this. So I call this the SCOPE framework. It stands for multiple things, but S is for stress management, C is for community, O is for optimism, being optimistic in life, P is having purpose in life, and E is energy, youthful energy. Do you practice any of those aspects in your longevity routine?
Um, very much so. So, again, I don't mind being personal in an interview like this, but I would say that my personal disposition has always been more towards worrying than not.
Mm.
And so I identified probably 15 years ago when I first went and did a few yoga classes. And I realized at the end of the yoga class, when the practitioner was saying, now is your opportunity to give your brain a rest. You don't need to think for the next 2 or 3 minutes, and I'll take you through a routine. And all they were doing was a breathing exercise to finish off the yoga class. But it resonated because for the first time ever, it got me out of my head in a sense, which was to say, you can give your brain a break. But that led me into, again, 15 years of investigations into different types of mindfulness-based practice. And so I've followed that for an awfully long time. So that's integral to what I do. And so with that comes good tools to manage stress, good tools to reframe how I choose to think about things. And this is something that, again, I have to do, and I think many people need to do ongoing, because depending on what your disposition might be, you're going to always be trying to manage it better than it had been before. So that one is extremely important for me.
Hmm. I'm very much the same. I realized over the past few years that I'm a worrier, and especially after having kids. But it's a bit of a different story. Fantastic. Thanks for summarizing your longevity approach. So I'd like to transition now to the place where you work at Chi Longevity. Again, you're the chief clinical officer there and the senior dietitian. Could you just give us an overview of what is Chi Longevity?
Yeah, so Chi Longevity, it fits very much with a lot of the things that I've said already. So I come from a strong science-based background, and Chi Longevity does exactly the same. So they're a precision gerontology clinic that uses medicine and evidence base as the framework for everything that they do, and that the only tests that we do are validated tests. And again, any kind of interventions that we do have to sit within that evidence hierarchy. And there's the point at which science goes from animal models to humans, so translational research. We will kind of set the bar there, and then we look at human studies and see where is the evidence on the human studies under the lens of longevity. And so that's what the clinic's premise is. And the big reason for having the clinic like that is because the field of longevity at the moment is, the Wild West,
Mm.
and that it's exploded. and there are people with big voices or great marketing messages or are very good in the manipulations that they choose to do on social media, and it's very appealing, and people will jump on all sorts of things, but where's the evidence, right? And so our clinic is trying very hard to come at that particular point. And there are a handful of clinics like that in the world, and we're certainly one of them. And so I think that's the basic premise.
Great. So, what type of test? Can you give us an example on what type of testing you offer to your clients?
So our approach is a systems biology approach. Some clinics will take an imaging approach to begin with, and they would say we start with imaging. We start with wanting to understand your different physiological and functional systems and organ systems of the body to the best of our ability, and looking at it from as many approaches as we can. So if you're looking at your cardiovascular system or immune function, for example, or musculoskeletal system, where can we get our information from? Well, we can draw the information from blood markers. We can glean certain amount of information from your genes and what genetic dispositions you might have. We can look at proteins. We can look at the microbiome. We can look at functional tests. And so we draw from all of these different fronts to look at all of these different systems themselves. So we've got lots of different functional tests. It might be brain, validated brain assessments that you're doing on a computer that give you a picture of your different types of reasoning and memory. It could be things that most people in the longevity field would be very comfortable knowing: lung function, VO2 max, body composition, etc. We've got other interesting validated tools like advanced glycation end product reader to look at risk for cardiovascular disease. We have a series of different types of functional tests, and all of these are validated tests, and that's to build a good understanding. We do look at some biological aging clocks, but again, within the context of these are tools that have only recently come from research to the consumer, so they might not be, super accurate or super precise, but we can still glean some information from those. But what we're not saying is that somebody is one biological age. Ultimately, what we're trying to look and see is organs and systems are all going to age at different rates, and that I would imagine in time we'll have different clocks for different facets of your physiology and functionality, and these become markers of measure. And of course, we're doing some of those too. So that's sort of that's the data collection, and that's the type of diagnostics that we do.
So, would the average client go through the whole gamut of testing, or are there some tests that produce a bigger bang for the buck? Let's say.
Yeah, so because we're a clinic, and due to our location, we can offer small bites of the cherry, let's say, in doing certain types of functional tests that might give you insights to certain parts of your health and aging, right through to doing sort of like a complete program. So it can come down to people's budget. It can come down to the things that they're interested in. And so we have a range of different ways that we go about offering our services to people. And we're also not interested in just collecting information and providing a baseline. We've spent a huge amount of effort in the whole behavior change aspect of it. Because if we take that scientific approach to things, is to let's test, then you want to intervene and retest. So you would do that if you were taking a blood pressure medication. You take a blood pressure medication, you test your blood pressure. Is the dose and is the drug that you're using working? And then you retest over time. We take that same approach with respect to longevity too. So test, intervene, retest. And in that intervention process, do we use health coaches and personal trainers, or staying with your clinical team and making sure or trying to be held accountable for the work that you're going to need to do to make those changes. And going back to what I'd said at the start, a lot of the things, when you think about the interventions, are these hormetic responses. They all take work, and we know that humans quite often don't want to do the work. They just want to take the pill.
Hmm. Yeah, we find that very much, and you can tell even by looking at social media or even YouTube, the popularity is in the pills, right, in the supplements, and that's where people gravitate towards
Of
for sure.
course.
So let's talk a little bit more about interventions now. So what type of interventions are offered? We kind of talked about this with your personal approach, but at Chi Longevity specific, what type of interventions would the average client receive?
So if we go from the top down, not everybody will have to do all of these things. I still believe that at the moment, lifestyle changes with respect to longevity is where a lot of the evidence currently lies. So we do dig very deep on understanding people's eating patterns, sleeping patterns, and exercise patterns. We're in a world now where you can track over time glucose levels, activity levels, eating patterns, etc. So we use that type of technology. We know what our clients are doing, and we get very granular in making changes on those fronts. But now we're looking at it through the lens of longevity. Years gone by, it might have been, you know, for aesthetic reasons, or just for heart disease, or um, performance, for example. So now it's, well, no, if your health outcome is health span and longevity, how do you do these things? Then, as you would know, there are no prescribed drugs purely for longevity yet, because longevity is not considered a disease state. So
Mhm.
therefore, you can't do that. But that will change in time. But if people are already taking medications, then you can choose certain medications over others that might have cross purposes and therefore might be longevity promoting in their own right. So you can review repurposed medications, and then, which we've already touched on, is this huge world of unrestricted supplementation that may or may not be correcting nutritional defects, or that you might be trying to optimize, or you might be trying to target aging pathways. And of course, I've already said, we look at the evidence, we'll do a risk reward analysis, and decide whether or not you may be a suitable candidate for certain small molecules. So they become the important, the major ones. We can also talk about environment, for example, to a reasonable extent. And then everything else that we do has to be within the laws of the country. But not only that, it's got to fit within our, in-house laws on where's the evidence. And so if there is an intervention that we think is a wellness intervention, well, we could say by all means do it, but we're not necessarily saying it's directly targeting the aging process. Or something that might be interesting, but the data's not there yet, we would say, watch this space. Let's see how more clinical trials come up and show before we would take something like that on board.
Okay. So it sounds like a whole range, but everything is science and evidence based in terms of how you approach it. Fantastic.
Very strong. Yeah, that for us is, if there's any strong message, that's the message that I want to bring across. Because in some respects, you can have lots of bells and whistles, and you have these very, very exciting things that people are offering. I'm unsure that those businesses are going to still be around in 2 or 3 or 5 years, when it's identified that they had absolutely no relevance whatsoever, or they were detrimental, or it was somebody making just a lot of money over
Mhm.
nonsense. So we're banking on the fact that that science and evidence based and good clinical practice will prevail.
Yeah, I completely agree with that approach. So, can you maybe tell us about one or two success stories from Chi Longevity that you've seen or heard of, I guess?
I think a few that come to mind is, we've had some clients that have experienced significant ill health in their life. So let's say a a cancer diagnosis, for example, and they're a cancer survivor, and we know that significant periods of bed rest or periods of ill health increase the pace of aging. Because I think we do understand the aging process really reasonably well, and we can sort of acknowledge that the pace of aging can be accelerated and decelerated. And just having clients like that coming and saying, I kind of want to play catch up now. And then over time, us seeing their baseline change. So we could see the impact of this, traumatic event that's occurred in their life. And we can see the price that they have paid. And then seeing over time those values changing, and also just how these people then feel too. So, internally and from an aging perspective, maybe we've been able to have some kind of impact, and then also there's just been the outright impact for themselves. So those ones have been, outstanding to be part of.
Yeah, it's very rewarding, right? Seeing people, especially that have had health issues, improve their health and extend their lifespan. What about any success story of a healthy individual that was successful or relatively healthy that was successful in terms of, decreasing their biological age or slowing their pace of aging?
Yeah, I think where it's difficult here is that, do we really have good markers for biological aging yet, right? So we do use biological aging clocks, and I would say rather than giving a number to it, I would rather say if you're using 6 clocks, for example, what is the signature of that clock, above or below chronological age? And then when you've done various interventions, how does that signature change? We don't just do a single intervention, so we'll never be able to pinpoint why a certain clock moved. We can get some insight to it. And we've got many, many circumstances where that signature has significantly changed. And so I think that in 2025, that's probably as good as we've got right now. And again, because we're trying to use the best clocks on the market that have got the best research behind them. But I think that space will change and needs to change. But yes, the answer is we've seen our signature of biological clocks improve.
Right. And you're not just talking about epigenetic clocks, right? I mean, there's all sorts of clocks, metabolomic clocks, glycan clocks, and then pheno age, based on blood biomarkers. I assume you guys use all of them?
Yeah, all those ones that you said are ones that we routinely use.
Fantastic. And I'd like to circle back a little bit to you personally, if you don't mind sharing. Are your clocks at a level that you're happy with?
So I'm always interested, and so I tend to put my neck out on the chopping block and try different things. So I've tried most of the clocks that we've got. I'm fortunate so far, all the clocks that I have ever tested on, from a biological aging perspective, I've come in significantly under chronological age. So that's good. Right? But again, despite having a very, what I would consider a lifetime of good health, I still haven't gotten through unscathed because I've got plaque on my arteries. So I've done diagnostic tests and imaging tests expecting to see great results and getting some surprises. Not the best surprise. But we're not immune. We're not immune. You can have an incredibly healthy life, but maybe the hand that I got dealt with had me predisposed to some things, and despite my best efforts, I'm still having to live with these things.
Right. So I think you're right. There's no biomarkers that we have now that can represent overall health, right, or every aspect of health, right? So you can look healthy at various biological age markers, but you may not be healthy in certain organs or systems. So yeah, I think That's where we're lacking right now. But I think we're moving towards an era where tests like the metabolomic tests will be better suited to detect more aspects and more organ health. So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. Okay, fantastic. So I think I'd like to finish with a few rapid fire questions. So the first one will be any books that you recommend in the longevity space, maybe for somebody that's new to the space.
Look, I do. I do like Outlive by Peter Attia.
Yeah,
That was one of the more recent books that I have read. So
yeah.
I like a lot of the stances that he has on that front. And then I'll kind of quickly flip from book to podcast. And one that I really respect is Matt Cabeline's OptiSpan
Right.
podcast. Again, he's in that realm of longevity research. He comes at it with, I think, a very strong evidence base, and so I like his work very much. I tend to listen to podcasts and pay for podcasts now more so than reading books. And Simon Hill is a very interesting Australian
Mhm.
podcaster. Again, I think he presents his work in a very nice, strong way. I think that looking at things from that mindfulness-based perspective, so not always looking purely at the medicine. Sam Harris he's a very interesting neuroscientist, and he has an app which is called Waking Up, that you have to pay for. But the fundamentals course and the introductory course on his approach to mindfulness, I think, is very, very interesting. These are the areas and the spaces that I spend quite a lot of my time. I think that Rhonda Patrick, Find
Mhm.
My Fitness, again, she talks a little bit more about supplementation, but again, very strong scientist.
Right.
Andy Galpin is an interesting exercise
Mhm.
physiologist, and I think
Yes.
his approach is also quite good. So there's a handful of ones to keep people busy.
Yeah, definitely. And those are definitely scientific or science-based individuals. So good crew of individuals to look into. In terms of interventions or testing that's coming on the horizon, anything that excites you?
I'm interested in uh, it hasn't hit Singapore or Australia yet, but there is an interesting imaging with respect to heart, which is called Clearly,
Hmm.
Cleerly.
Hmm.
I think that one's very interesting because at the moment, obviously, heart health and cardiovascular disease is the number one killer. And the imaging is really important, and we can image the heart very, very well. But when you do a CT angiogram at the moment, it's picking up, it's three-dimensional, which is fantastic, but you're really seeing predominantly hard plaque. And clearly, AI software tools are giving you insights into soft plaque. So I think that is an up-and-coming technology, and it just really highlights where the beneficial aspects of AI can come in with imaging and what that might then be able to do, because then we might get even more early detection. And I'm uncertain that you can change hard plaque, but you might be able to do some significant interventions on soft plaque and actually see some reversal.
Right. And the soft plaque is the one that's supposedly more dangerous, right?
Correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that one may be reversible. So if you're looking at early intervention, then are the interventions that we're doing having some kind of positive impact, and that you just might not have seen it in your standard CT angiograms. But I have done a little bit of reading, and there are new versions of CT angiogram that have higher fidelity too. So the actual machinery is also improving.
Hmm. Yeah. Less radiation, less time
Correct.
mentioned for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the last one is what do you think is the biggest myth in the longevity space?
Oh, I, I, I'm gonna put a broad one on most supplementation. I think
Hmm.
that and it's an easy one, right? It's very easy to buy supplements, and I think it's a very easy message for people to say that you should all be taking this, and that is just not any kind of message that says everybody should be taking something. I think already is a cause for concern. So I would put at the moment where most supplementation stands, not all, and the way in which it is marketed in its promises for longevity benefits, I'd put that as a myth.
Yeah, I think people put too much weight on that, on supplements for sure. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Lapsys. Where can people follow your journey and your teachings?
So I'm on LinkedIn as Dr. Naras Lapsys. My website, drnaraslapsys.com.sg, and then obviously anything that is coming from Chi Longevity as well.
Great. Thanks again for coming on the show and sharing your experience.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.